Dan, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks a lot for coming along. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. It's a pleasure, and I appreciate the invite. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. I thought it would be good to start by literally telling the listeners who you are and talk a little bit about your journey so far. Like, how have you got to where you are, and maybe some key turning points in your journey, or maybe some key challenges. So,
Yeah.
yeah, go for it. Fire away.
Oh boy. Okay. I'll try and keep this as fairly succinct as possible. So I'm from England originally. As the people listen to this podcast, they're going to catch probably 8 different accents. But I came over to the States in '98 as a late teenager and have never really left. Professionally, I've sort of moved through the ranks, and you and I about this when I first met you. Is I've been everything from a personal trainer at Gold's Gym right through to working in the NBA, which is the job that I had just prior to being in the development and partnership side of where I'm at currently. And then academically, I have a couple of master's degrees in exercise science, and I have a PhD in performance psychology. So there's an awful lot that went into all of that, which I'll save everybody. Maybe the details will come out in the conversation. But I think to your point about like turning points, and obviously to the point of the podcast leadership, what I've always tried to do is bring a athlete centered or a people centered approach to this, which I guess would be quantified as sort of servant leadership. What I found interesting in the path that I've walked is that it doesn't always get immediately appreciated, and so some of the turning points for me have been really around working with coaches who are looking for more of a demonstrative or I don't know, a non-democratic approach of leadership. And, you know, me being a leader in weight rooms or me being a leader in certain performance spaces is always a challenge. And so there's been a few along the way where you just have to sort of buckle down to what you believe in. And I'm thinking in my head to some mid-major basketball work that I did and lacrosse work that I did, and kind of really believe in the roots of, again, we'll talk more about my specific sort of application of it. And then being able to sort of cement that and then use the sort of fuel of success, either because the team has been successful, athletes have responded well, to then take the next step. And then that has been noted elsewhere, which has allowed me to move through my career. So I can be a bit more specific than that, but I think, you know, sort of having an international flavor to how I see things, being sort of professionally grown up in the States and in the States systems, and fusing those two with servant leadership has been very, very successful for me along the way.
Excellent. No, that's great. I want to come back to some of those things, but that's a great introduction. Clearly, you've done a lot of studying, and you're very, very well qualified, which is fantastic. But tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. I'd love to hear about your current role, and then we'll delve
Yeah.
back into some of the leadership areas.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I currently work at Joe Gibbs Human Performance Institute. So Joe Gibbs, for listeners who aren't familiar, is a Super Bowl winning American football coach who won Super Bowls late 80s, 90s with the former Washington Redskins, who are now known as the Commanders. And he decided in the early 90s to run and operate and build a NASCAR franchise. So NASCAR is the stock car sort of equivalent to Formula One in the States, and has just become as successful, if not more successful, than he was in the American football space. So anyway, to kind of move that story forward, we have on site a world leading, one of a kind biomechanics lab, which was originally equipped to assess pit crew members, current pit crew members, kind of what makes them good from a biomechanical perspective, and then also potential pit crew members from a talent identification process. So that whole thing was the initial genesis of this lab, but now it basically assesses everything from all sports. So there's interchangeable flooring, there's a wood floor that goes on top of the concrete motor racing floor, and there's a turf floor that will go on top of that. So basically it covers all different sports from all different capacities. My role in this has changed from being more of a practitioner, which is my history, which again we'll talk about. I'm now the director of strategic development and global partnerships. So sort of the superficial part of that is quite literally business development and partnerships and kind of sales, which is just interesting for me coming from my background. But what it really ends up being on a daily basis, which is, I guess, where the leadership piece comes in to an extent, is strategic development is more about strategies about utilizing the space. because this is a unique biomechanics lab. So if I'm talking to an owner or an athlete or a physical therapist, or you name the sort of discipline, it's my background and my sort of insight to help them understand it. And from a partnership perspective, it really isn't just, okay, we got to sell this thing to anybody who's willing to pay for it. It's picking key partners that you can grow and develop something specific. And I would say there's a lot of my experience in leadership and I guess mentorship is in kind of both those places, because while it's my professional pursuit, what I really want to do is do it well and do it with the right people. And so understanding people and helping people sort of be creative on the strategy side with how they can utilize such a unique lab. And then on the partner side of things is helping and being a good partner and a good mentor and leader from my side and their side to me to do this well and with the right people and the right teams, which really, as you know, is why we connected in the first place, because I believe that about yourself and think highly about you and what you do also.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and it's interesting how many people want to kind of do it well and do it with the right people in their career, in their life,
Yeah.
but don't always
Yeah.
equate that to good leadership.
Yeah.
And so you can have situations where the leadership's really poor, but people are still wanting to do a good
Yeah.
job, and they can't work out why. So, I mean, it's good that you kind of put those two things together. I'd love to jump back and ask you to kind of reflect a little bit about your career, and think about maybe some areas where you feel your leadership has had a real impact in the
Yeah.
organization or with some key individuals. Have you got any examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I mean, there's a lot of definitions of leadership, and I'm sure this may even come up. But like I said a couple of times, I mean, servant leadership is something that I believe in. And in the sort of support staff roles that I've been in, even when I've been a key piece in them, a director or a head or whatever it might be, I still firmly believe in this sort of servant leadership approach for a variety of reasons that again, we can get into. So that's always been my personal approach. I also think there needs to be authenticity in leadership. And what I mean by that is that I am the product of a Royal Air Force father, a nursing mother, both of which are service based occupations. And so it's sort of in my blood. It's how I was raised. It's how I go about my business. It's sort of as much of my DNA as my eye color. So it fits who I am. It fits how I think. It fits how I operate. It fits the verbiage I use. If you are more of a hardliner, maybe a militaristic type of leader, so long as I think you're authentic and you keep the main thing, you could be effective in that role. The reason I'm bringing all that up is that if you try and mix and match that, and you are someone who's maybe softer of touch or more attuned to people and sort of the empathetic reaction to people, and you try and be this sort of badass military type leader, you're going to fail because it's not authentic to you. You really can't keep it up. And to be frank, athletes or really anybody that's been around is going to sniff it out as sort of BS and shut you down immediately. So to get back to your question, I've always tried to stay true to me in these spaces. And so the other thing about leadership that's important to mention, which I got off track there a little bit, is you can be the president, you can be the vice president, you can be the director, you can have those titles, which automatically give you a leadership position. But you can also be the leader of yourself. You can be the leader of your immediate group. You can be the leader of sort of like the secondary tier of group below executive management, and you can still be a leader. And that's something that I think is important to mention in this podcast. I think it's important when I used to speak to sort of developmental and young athletes is you can be a leader in all spaces. I think sometimes that just gets said. It's kind of like, oh, you'd be a leader of, whatever, but it's true. So to kind of answer your question more specifically, 2 jobs ago, I worked at Georgia Tech, which is, for those who don't know, in the ACC, which is one of the biggest basketball leagues collegiately in America. It plays with Duke and North Carolina and some of the big name schools, and has a very rich history. And it was a massive rebuild job. So we came in, coach unfortunately got fired, which is sad, which means, as everybody knows who's been around sports, you kind of started at the beginning. So it was a really, really hard thing to kind of build it all the way back up again, too. And so we did have a head coach, and we did have associate head coaches, and we had people in these high ranking positions. But there had to be leadership and connectivity and glue guy type of people in the second group of people that were very athlete facing and were around them every single day. And so I think one of the hardest things I did professionally was work for 5 years with this group to sort of get over the hump. And eventually, my last year, we won the ACC Championship, which hadn't happened there since 1993. And my leadership, again, servant leadership to the athletes, which were our charges, but being sort of the glue and being linked in with all the different disciplines and taking lead roles and taking ownership and initiative of a lot of different things became very, very successful. And that group of us, from sort of basketball operations to myself to medical, even the media group, we were very, very tight. And I think that allowed us to deal with the hardships of like overcoming some of the franchise stuff. And again, it led us to win the ACC championship. And an even more of a magnifier on that would be the year that we won it was the COVID year, which was terrible for everybody in many, many ways. And clearly, I don't want to make light of it because obviously people died and it's a terrible time. But for us, it was also, we have to play sports because people need entertainment. They need something. So, you know, like everywhere in the world, there was a way was found to play sports. But it was really hard. It was really hard to do it. There was constant pressure about losing players to illness and just everything else that came with the COVID thing. So having that tight knit group through mentorship and leadership and being like a leader in your space was very, very difficult. But again, I think my style was very effective. So again, it helped us win an ACC championship, but also when the pressure hits and you start to see cracks appear, it really was something that I'm very proud of, that we stay connected through that time period because of the different type of leadership that I displayed and hopefully brought other people along with me.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I took so much out of what you said there. And right at the beginning, where you were talking about kind of leading yourself, and there's just so many areas that you can bring
Yeah,
leadership in. And it's kind of, you were talking about leadership as a title versus leadership as a function. And you don't
absolutely.
necessarily have to have all the titles of leadership to be able to bring leadership. And often, like for me, I think often the best leaders ultimately are not the ones who kind of got the title first, then learned how to lead, but are more the ones who showed
Couldn't agree
the
more.
function of leadership and really showed the potential and worked their way up until they,
Yes.
you know, they had that role. And so no, I really liked what you were
Nah,
saying there.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Not to cut you off, but this is a bit more formally when I was working with college and development athletes. But one thing that always kind of baffled me a little bit was the concept of picking team captains. So there's discussions about captains in general, but it was always the seniors, the best player on the team. And I was like, look, I understand that they sort of earn the right by time in 4 years in college, whatever it might be, best player on the team, they're going to be on the floor, whatever. But it doesn't, to your point, mean that they're the best leaders on the team. Like maybe they need to be a co-leader because they have a certain gravitas to them because, again, of age and ability. But some of the worst leaders I've been around, to your point, are the ones that are just, you're the team captain. And I'm like, sure, I get it, but you're just doing it because you feel like you have to do it. It's not because that person can actually lead this group. And some of them, actually, I would say too, and this is probably true in your experience, don't really want the mantle of leader. They know they're talented. They know all the different things that come along with their time in the field and on the court or whatever. But they don't necessarily want the title of leader because it comes with some serious responsibility, and not everybody's built that way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, and I think I think another thing you said earlier about your experience at Georgia Tech was interesting, where you were talking about how you know, you guys were really the glue in that situation. But one thing that
Yeah,
struck me was you said you were there, was it 5 years?
five.
And
Yeah,
yeah, and I think people think success often comes overnight, but you know, it takes time to build stuff, and to bring a
yeah,
level of consistency and leadership over a 5 year period clearly led to some really good results. But what struck me
yeah,
the most was that it was actually in the toughest time of all that you
yeah,
guys made the most impact. And for me, that is what good leaders do. You know, you said that it
yeah,
was during that COVID period, during the hard times, where you guys really kind of shone and really made that impact. And I think that is a real hallmark of good leadership, because
yeah,
you could be very inward focused and woe is me, things are so
yeah,
hard, I'm struggling. But to be able to navigate your own struggles and put them aside and bring leadership to the people who need it is really commendable. So yeah,
Yeah, well, I appreciate
thanks for
that.
that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. No, I agree too. I mean, everybody who works in really anywhere, I shouldn't even just say sports, but in high performance activities, will completely feel exactly what you just said. And it's like when things are going good and you're winning, it's easy for everybody. Everybody's good. It's the losing, players get injured, something bad happens. That's when you really know. And it's the same. And I hate to use military analogies because obviously the cost is much higher, but like it's the same thing. Like when things are under pressure, that's when leadership really shows. And again, it doesn't have to be screaming and shouting and like mother effing people. It can be gathering people up and bringing them with you, and making them feel like, I don't know, not safe and secure is a bit too soft of a conversation, but making that they are valued and that we're going to be okay. But as a group, we're going to be okay. And I can help give you direction. And even maybe if there isn't a direction together, we can kind of navigate this because it's going to take all of us, not just one of us. So I agree completely.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about the fact that you're from, a family where your parents had service-based
Yeah.
occupations, so that kind of helped shape and mold who you are and your DNA and so on. What else has given you this kind of servant leadership approach, and what other things have you taken in over time and absorbed that have really helped you become
Yeah.
the leader that you are now, whether that's books, whether that's people,
Yeah.
whether that's resources, how have you got to where you are now in terms of your leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that obviously a lot of it is experiential, and only I can be me and you be you, and the listeners be the listeners. So some of that is just the circumstances you're in. But I think when you're in circumstances, either as a younger person or even I learn every day now, so it's not just about age. It's openness and being attuned to it because when I first was a personal trainer, for example, I was a leader I was like an assistant fitness director, so I was a leader of like a couple of personal trainers and the head guy. But I was a leader of myself, but also leading people through fitness journeys and health and well-being and so on. And so just being attuned to what they're saying to you, listening to them, like trying to understand what they actually need. And then obviously and I'm not just and I should say I'm not just saying like reps and sets and nutrition plans. I'm talking about like literally what they need. They're having a bad day. They've gained 2 pounds. They're coming off I had some people who were coming off surgeries, like almost like rehab or like post rehab. They're coming off a heart surgery. They're cleared medically, but they have to get fit now. So it's not just about like reps and set schemes. It's about like being attuned to what they actually need to help guide them forwards. And I'm fortunate that I have always had a bit of a knack for that, but I would say that everybody should tap into that because you're going to learn a lot more from your charges and the circumstances that you're in than just constantly believing your way is the right way all the time. Now, with experience, time, and some other things that we'll talk about, you then have to filter that and kind of go, well, that's not true, or that's wrong, or like, I'm sorry you feel that way, but this is the way that it has to be because I have this knowledge, this experience. But if you're not empathetic and attuned to it, you're going to miss things that are needed. So to answer your question, I think the learning process for me as a 20-something-year-old personal trainer started with people who needed help and guidance. Then I take that to the mid-major college scene in America. Now I'm dealing with 360 athletes on a daily basis and all the coaches. So I'm dealing with constant questions and constant issues and concerns from coaches and leadership while trying to understand what each of these athletes need. So I need to have confidence in myself and my decision-making skills, but being attuned and open to what everybody's asking. And there's a political piece to that and just being kind of savvy about it too. But I guess it's confidence in yourself from experience and the third bit I'll get to in a second, but also being attuned to what people are asking and people are being said because, some of the best leaders I've met are, 40-year-old housewives who are looking to just get healthy and better, and they're leading their kids, and you can take pieces from what they're doing. And some of the best coaches I've met, maybe assistant coaches who are sort of game planning and watching. If you're not attuned to their questions and maybe like thinking through the answers, you're not going to get better either. So sort of it being attuned and empathetic is important. The other thing that I'll say, which I'm a big believer in, is you have to look to the outside to fill your insides. And what I mean by that is
Mm.
that we tend to personally and professionally all read the same things, go to the same conferences, you know, take the same classes, same blogs, all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I think as a caveat to my statement in a second, you have to learn your craft. You need to, you know, listen to this podcast and learn from the best and like pick people's brains and become educated. However, if we're all just doing the same thing, how are we going to shift? How are we going to move? How are we going to blend? Because there's great leaders in the business space. There's great leaders in the law space. There's great leaders in the medical space, in the military space. So I think if you constantly just get blinders onto health, fitness, performance, strength and conditioning, or whatever, and you don't go, okay, this perhaps isn't strength and conditioning leadership, or this isn't basketball coaching leadership, but there's pieces from it that I can pick from in the books that I read, or the things that I watch, or the documentaries that I choose to, or the people that I choose to call. You're missing such a massive, rich area of knowledge and information. But again, I do think you have to sort of work on being attuned to it, because you'll read a book and you'll miss that there was a huge piece of leadership in there. It just happened to be about a guy who is the, I don't know, roadie for a 70s rock band. You know, and I know that sounds funny, but like it's the same thing. It's a bunch of high performing individuals who have to be optimal at the moment of performance, and this person's in charge of them. Take from that, put it into your process. Again, I go back to, you've got to learn to be attuned and like really understand what you're looking for, and you're going to go, oh, that's amazing. And then the second thing is you have to also, I think, be authentic to yourself, because the roadie example, which I'm just picking out of the air, is maybe useful for me because of, again, servant leadership, but you may not be that way and want to focus on more of the military books. But I know a lot of people who are a bit more like I am, by position, by personality, by experience, whatever it might be. And then they go and read like these hardcore military leader books like David Goggins and the people who are brilliant, brilliant guys. So I'm not downplaying that. But if you're not a piss excellence everyday guy, you're more about process and people, maybe that isn't the right book for you. So I know that's kind of a wide-ranging answer, but I think it starts about being sort of locked in and to the job itself, being attuned and empathetic to the people around you, so you can absorb from other people, and don't get stuck in the same lane that we're sort of always in, because that's easy and I would say limiting and maybe a little bit lazy.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. So much good stuff there. And I think one of the things I take from that is that, and I've heard it from a lot of people who are leaders, that you have to be, like you said, you used the word, you have to be attuned to things, and
Yeah,
a lot of good leaders are very observant. They learn from watching, from picking
yeah,
up. They've got a high level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, and and so they kind of know what they need, and they
yeah,
and so there must be some natural, I mean, I know it can be trained, leadership can be trained and learned, but there
yeah.
seems to be some natural knack for it with people who just
Agreed.
are attuned to picking up the right stuff and then knowing how
Yeah.
to put it into practice in their specific situation to remain authentic to themselves. And I
Yes.
really
Yes.
liked what you said actually about style of leadership, and I've not heard anyone say it in the same way, that um don't try be somebody else, and it's okay that if your style isn't like David Goggins or somebody else, that you don't try be like them. Of
Yeah.
course, like you said, we can always learn from other people,
Of
but
course. Yes.
don't try be somebody that you're not. So no, I mean, so
Yeah.
much so much good stuff in there.
Yeah, and I mean, as sort of a piece of that too, and it kind of goes back to, you asked me before about experiences, is that I believe personally that what I would call is like fear-based leadership
Mm.
is limiting and has a short shelf life, because you can terrorize or strike fear, and this is an extreme version of being like very much like a hard ass person, to do anything if you want to, and without getting into like extreme examples, like history's proven that. But it does have a shelf life. It does, because that isn't how people like to be motivated. It isn't. It doesn't have as long as a tenure as other things. As you know, and like I'm a believer in employing kindness, and I'm a believer in employing empathy in these leadership styles. But again, that's authentic to me. But I found, for me, much like you said, in my positions, in my environments with the athletes that I've had way longer ranging success. I've asked them to do things that they absolutely don't want to do because they don't want to squat at 7 a.m. In a Monday morning. They don't want to, whatever it might be, do some recovery modality, which you and I know is critically important. And the last thing they want to do is even think about it. But because I've kind of met them where they're at and tried to raise them up. And quite frankly, in doing so, they've also raised me. Those ties that bind are just so much stronger, and for me have gone much longer. And earlier in my career, and even I think up until I got out of college and got into the NBA, because of how I articulate this and how I did it, even with the success I've had, humble brag, pat on the back, I always got things like they don't need you to be their friend. And I had a coach once say, particularly to men, but it would cross gender, young men crave discipline. And I was always like, hey, I'm not trying to be their friend. I'm trying to meet them where they're at, have some connectivity, have a place of where they can find comfort. Because every role I've had is always asking people to do things they don't want to do, which again is part of leadership. And I'm using things like squatting. I mean, we were taking salivary biomarkers from millionaire basketball players. We is me. I was taking salivary biomarkers from millionaire basketball players at 8:30 before shoot around on buses heading to and from the arena. They don't want to do that. They want to eat their breakfast sandwich, wake up, talk a bit of shit with each other, and move on with their day. So I've always
Mm.
had to ask people, which is again part of the support staff and part of leadership. And so to do that, and particularly in the NBA example, because they have the right to just tell me to go away and they're not going to do it. Whereas in college, you can kind of argue again, having this sort of understanding and common touch and connectivity, or whatever you want to call it, has allowed me to be more effective. And so I had to fight these things like don't want to be their friend. I wasn't. I don't need more friends. I'm 29 at the time, or 30 years old. It's not what this is about. This is about creating a place for them to thrive, and not where I'm just constantly putting it on top of them and force them to do things. And then in terms of the discipline thing, I don't necessarily disagree that young men, young athletes, young people, crave discipline. They crave mentorship. They to the point of this podcast, they create. Now, is discipline part of that? Absolutely. How do you go about getting them to have it? That's up to you and your leadership style. But that's not just it. You can't just beat them to death verbally.
Mm.
That's not what this is about. And I would also say in a lot of the different positions I've had up to now, and I would even say when I was an applied sports scientist with the Hornets, but all before that, and a touch with the Hornets, has always had the word coach in my title. Strength coach, I mean, personal trainer is part of that too. So there's some type of coaching or where you're in a teaching position. As an applied sports scientist, I'm applying science. I'm teaching the people around me science. People forget that coaching is teaching, coaching is mentorship, mentorship is leadership. And they kind of forget that, like, that's part of this whole thing, this whole package. Like, way back in the day before sports was professional, way back in the day before sports and sort of working with younger people and development athletes was the way it is now. It was teachers. They were like high school and grammar
Mm.
school teachers who would teach history and then go and run the football. They're teachers. So I think if we forget that we're here to teach, which again comes from you having knowledge, being able to impart your knowledge, to your point, EQ and IQ kind of blended together. Once you start getting away from that as your leadership style, even if you're just a badass, but you're not teaching anybody, you're just screaming in an echo chamber, and people are feeling like that they just have to do it because you're telling them to. But who's learning anything? So again, I don't want to demonize more of a militaristic or less democratic way of leading because that's just not my style. But I think again, it has to be authentic, and you have to get results out of it, and have people have to care, and also you have to be able to lead the lowest common denominator of that group. So if
Yeah.
I'm dealing with my lacrosse team or my field hockey team or my NBA basketball team, there's one or two guys that are gonna love me getting in them and getting after them and kind of like giving them crap or like getting in their face. But you know what? There's someone who sits at the end of the bench who's as important, maybe even been the best player, who doesn't respond to that. If I don't have enough awareness, EQ, IQ, enough experience of other ways of doing this, reading, podcasts, listening to people, that person I'm not reaching. And that's quite a detriment, A, to your leadership, but also B, to the team that you've been asked to lead with. So again, how you reach them, I think, is up to you. I'm just sort of like preaching the gospel of what I do, but you have
Yeah.
to make sure whatever your thing is works for everybody, not just the two or three that love that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. There's obviously, it's not an easy profession that we work in. Lots of high demands, especially
Yeah.
in high level elite sport. Can you think of any of the kind of unique challenges that you've had in the sports performance field that you might not have already touched on, and any examples of where your leadership has really been able to help you through some of those unique challenges that you might get in sport that you might not get elsewhere?
Yeah. Oh God. I mean, I think it kind of depends. It depends. Like, I think the leadership piece, because I think when like when I work in college, you're overseeing, a group of athletes. Even though you're not the head coach, you're the lead person in your performance. In my case, collegiately was strength and conditioning, and then it was much more on the sports science side with the Hornets. That's my area to sort of lead. A lot of different examples of just sort of like helping players kind of through the process. I think coming back from injury is an easy one because you're at an athlete's lowest point. Particularly in the professional level where not only is their livelihood attached to their bodies, but also they just have always trusted their bodies, and now something's happened when they can't trust. Like now, my knee is torn up, and I'm coming back from surgery. It doesn't feel right, and so I think leadership is really important there because it's either leadership of myself, my group, or the team, depending on your position. But you have to help that individual navigate these dark days post injury. And that I think is a leadership thing because there's the obvious part of like coordinating medical strength and conditioning, sports science, nutrition, and the person, but there's also literally leading this now injured individual to understand there's a process. This is how we're going to go about doing it. These are the small term goals that we're going to set together. This is the expectation I want you to put on me. This is all
Mhm.
I'm asking you to do, and then engage them in the process. So I think injury is a good one, and without citing specific examples and putting people's personal business out there, there's a number of them. And I mean, I remember one which it wasn't even me, where our leader in one of the groups, and again I can't say who, was there was an incident where it was a really traumatic lower limb injury where it came broke through the skin. And my boss at the time was unbelievable. Like he flew over because he'd seen it before. Unfortunately, he flew over to the athlete on the floor, basically used his body to shield them from seeing what was a gnarly looking injury, and then just talked in a calm way to this athlete. This athlete was going through every emotion imaginable, like unsure of what just happened, fear, um, like fear of like literally what just happened, but also like this: will I have to play basketball again? This particular individual didn't come from a high socioeconomic background. His family was banking on him, and my boss is just talking to him. At the same time, we had already had this coordinated, but he's sort of coordinating without physically doing it, us all merging around him. So one person is literally, obviously for the ambulance, another person is like holding limb, another person is like making sure the coaches are okay at that point in time. And that was me in this case because it was like a shocking thing to witness. And it was
Mm.
like this, and it was all very like unspoken and calm. And we obviously had been through like scenarios, but we all moved around what my boss was doing to support this poor individual on the floor, get him on a stretcher, he gets wheeled away, surgery, and then clicks into section two of leadership is okay. Now they're back. Now what do we do? Now we're starting to build this, and so on and so forth. So I think again, examples like that are easy because you have to lead someone from, in that case, quite a dramatic injury to them playing again, which they now are, which is great. There's other examples when you're going to get pressure from coaches, not to
Mhm.
belittle or give coaches a hard time, but they may not understand what you're doing. And again, I had Dan, they don't need to be your friend, or like, you need to be hard on them in practice. Where I'm like, everybody in this building is hard on them. Why do I have to be two? Don't they need one place where we can kind of like grow together? But you have to have self belief, maybe some experience behind you that your stuff works, and stay authentic to yourself. And I think leadership is important there. because what, and I've heard and seen this, it happened when I was in the college section when we were losing, and the head coach was dealing with obviously pressures, and he was then kind of not necessarily dealing with it great, and so it was sort of starting to be present, this type of pressure around everybody. And this assistant coach comes in and he says something. It was like kind of along the lines of like shit rolls downhill. If coach is feeling it, we're all going to feel it. And I was like, absolutely not, absolutely not. It is not our job to pass on, this pressure and this whatever. It's our job to keep that away from my assistants and the players. They need to focus on what's important. You know what I mean? Also, we're likely higher up in the totem pole, probably getting paid more. That guy certainly was. So it's sort of like, it's your job to cushion it, your job to catch it, your job to help problem solve, our job to help get coach back on track. My job to take the information and be very aware of what's going on, getting hired, getting fired, wins, losses, whatever. Make sure my assistants and my interns aren't maybe understand it, aren't feeling it, so they're doing a great job. And the athletes need to understand what's at stake because winning is important. That's why we're all here. But they need to just like work really hard. So like leadership is also not passing the buck, or I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but I have done, or shit rolling downhill. A lot of it is, no, we're catching it, and we're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna do, you know what I mean? Like, and I really hated that. And then the other thing that I would say too, and I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but I'm just thinking of other things that have happened, is people that end up in leadership positions that sort of moved up. And from being whatever their sort of early days and years are, and there's a number of, I had this in the NBA, I had it in college, and they were treated poorly when they were in this junior rank by their leaders. And then they become leaders, and they then treat their below people and athletes poorly. And their whole thing on it is, well, that's what happened to me, so this is what you have to do. And I'm always like, no, like, the difference. You know how bad that feels. You know that you didn't feel led. You know that you didn't feel useful. You know that that didn't necessarily get engaged with all the athletes, to my former example. So, like, leadership is also understanding the difference. You know what I mean? Like, I did not agree with that. I didn't like that. I didn't thrive under it. Now I'm in that position. Why would I treat somebody else like that? That's actually insanity. So I don't have any time for that at all, because that goes back to the authenticity piece. Like
Yeah.
to me that's almost that's all. I can't even think of the right word for it, but that one bothers me, I think, the most, because you know the difference and you're choosing. It's almost like being a bit of a coward, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Mm,
Where it's like,
mm.
no, you need to stand for what you believe in, because it's your
Yeah.
turn now. Now you better be right, but it's your turn now. So those
Yeah.
are three that I would say is like the kind of like catching problems before they roll downhill, because that's your position, that's leadership, and also again you're an authority position and you're getting paid the most in it. So like your
Yeah.
every part of that means you deal with it. They don't. Then it's also like you should know the difference, because you know what worked and didn't work when you were coming up as well. And then the
Yeah.
third and the one I think which is kind of easiest is the pathway through injury, because I think everybody at every step of the way has to lead, and then you have to then give leadership at the end of the return to play back to the athlete. Like, you can lead us now because you're back.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that that example that you gave of, just kind of catching the issues, catching the problems as they roll downhill is a really good one, but it takes a level of confidence,
Yeah,
it takes a level of maturity, but above all, it takes a high level of courage to do that,
yeah,
because ultimately you're having to manage up to the individual who's just letting it all out
yeah,
and
yeah,
and can't, and really struggling. And your job is not to pass that on, like you said. It's to
yeah,
kind of catch it, deal with it, manage the
yeah,
guys below you and lead them, but also manage the guys above you who are struggling and who
yeah,
are passing on this stuff. So, and that
yeah.
takes courage.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and you're right. And I think people will sit here and they'll say, "Great, it's easier said than done." Of course it is,
Mm,
and I failed as much as I've succeeded. So this isn't supposed to be like a, pulpit to kind of like bang on about it. But the two things I would say is how do you get confidence? Obviously, experience and age. That's just a matter of, you just have to do it. But it goes back to two things. It goes back to the work, which we'll get to in a second. Well, I guess I'll start there. It goes to the work. So we just talked about like understanding your leadership, reading things, seeing things, meeting people, talking to people. Like you said, like leadership isn't just something a mantle you're just given.
Yeah.
And like I said, some of the worst leaders are in fact the ones who just get it handed to them. So I think you have to do the work, and even if you don't see it as you being a leader, just you like learning enough about different things from different places and different scenarios, because history is the greatest teacher. So there's other historical things in history in a wider sense, but within sports, within your own life, to fall back on. That will give you confidence and courage because, like, I've seen it, I've done it, I've seen someone else do it, I've read about this, I believe in what they said. That's going to give me confidence and courage. The other part of it, which is again, it's easier said than done, but I think I've hit a point in my career when I can say this, is that the alternate to not doing it is kind of like getting fired or leaving or going out in a way that you don't feel like you did justice to.
Mm.
So if you feel like catching it before it rolls downhill is the right way, and you didn't do that and you got fired anyway, that's going to eat you up for the rest of your days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that kind of goes back to, I guess, your own professional and maybe personal morals and ethics. And this is a much deeper discussion. And that is the courage piece. But like I would, and I have a wife, I have kids. Like I don't want to walk around saying to people like, "Well, just put it on the line. It won't matter." I understand the ramifications of actions. I don't want to say that, but I will say I have always tried to do things where if it goes poorly, I feel like I did it the right way for the way that I see things, and to do the best by my employers, by the athletes, by the work I've been asked to do. I've tried to do that the best way to keep true to myself and go back to authenticity. And so
Yeah.
I can sleep at night. Because if I
Yeah.
cheapened out, and this is true, and you know, because you've been through it, oftentimes if you cheapen out and don't do that, you get fired anyway, because it's not helpful for anybody. So then you got fired anyway, and you feel like crap because you didn't do it. And then the people that you were in charge of know you did it that way, and they think
Yeah.
less of you. And it's not, and I'm not driven by external what people think about me, but it's so nice to people to go, Dan did it the right way. He tried really hard. He cared. So again, how'd you get confidence? Do the work,
Yeah.
absorb all of it, put it in practice in small pieces. So when the day comes, you've really got to lay it down. When COVID comes, you better be ready. And then the second thing is like be true to yourself and stay authentic, because when it matters most and you can get through that moment, you'll rest easy, and the people around you will appreciate that and respect you.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And people talk about these values like authenticity and integrity, but they're not just buzzwords. Living up
Yeah,
to it is another thing.
yeah,
Talking about authenticity is easy, but then actually being authentic and having
yeah,
a high level of integrity is another challenge. So I think that's
yeah,
great that you've thrown that out. So really appreciate that. Just want to move on to another area because you've obviously been quite deliberate and intentional about developing yourself as a leader. So it's not happened by
yeah,
accident. We spoke earlier about how you need to be you need to observe people, you need to pick up things, you need to have high level of emotional intelligence, and you need to do the work. Are there any kind of models or frameworks in leadership that you use, either that you've developed or that you've seen somewhere from a leader
yeah.
that you really like, or any kind of this is my rule of thumb, I do ABC, or I tend to do this. Yeah, any models or frameworks or ideas or
Yeah.
inspirations out there that could help our listeners?
No, that's great. And it's funny because not really. I wish I could say, hey, psych class, sophomore year, servant leadership by so and so, read these two papers and you'll be fine.
Mm,
A lot of it, I just think, goes back to your early questions where it has just been organic. I think for those listening, I think look into servant leadership. Kind of pick your particular flavor of which people. Obviously, there's tons of psych papers out there. There's books out there, whatever. I think the problem is it's a noisy marketplace,
yeah,
and I think that that's where it gets kind of like oh, this guy does it this way and this guy does it that way and everyone's right. And so I think you kind of need to understand again what works for you, and maybe as a young practitioner that goes back to having good mentors and people that you trust and like, and even if you have once like I was saying before, that you don't actually like, and then kind of like tap into that a little bit. I mean, rule of thumb, I always put people first, which goes back to servant leadership. I mean, I have this thing, people first always. I just think if you put people first, and you're trying to help people, um, you're
Mm,
gonna, if you put that as like a guiding principle, I think that that's important. I think you have to be curious, and I think most of us operate, and again, high performance in whatever particular thing that you do. We're kind of curious people by nature. Use that curiosity, like about this space. Like, don't just be curious about the next methodology for, whatever your thing is. Like, be curious about this space a little bit and kind of look into it. And, I've espoused a lot of, again, about servant leadership and sort of employing empathy and things like that, but also look into the other stuff. Because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is an interesting podcast that could be completely wrong, but like look into what you don't think you agree with, because that's important too. And I think I've done both of those things. I think I've channeled my curiosity. I think I've always put people first. I don't let hubris or fear make my decisions. Like by that I mean I'm a confident guy by experience and sort of age, I guess. But I don't let overconfidence or cockiness determine what I do or don't do. But I also don't let fear do the same thing, because you just don't do anything then. You know what I mean? I'm scared,
mm.
so I'm not going to do it. I'm scared to stop this shit from rolling downhill, so I'm not going to do it. But I'm not so cocky that I'm like, man, this is the best way to do it. I think I think those things. I think keeping yourself grounded. I think keeping people first and staying curious, which doesn't give you a framework, but just kind of gives you like a pathway, is the best way. Because I think the other thing is, for everybody is unique individually. Our circumstances are unique. So I think it's probably a blend of a couple of things that will work for you. Like, one thing, I was talking to somebody about this topic before, and I'm a big believer in the power of yes. So I say yes, including this podcast, which I do happily, and the whole thing. I say yes to almost everything, and I know that is problematic to a point, because I need to make sure I organize my day. But it's always been really good for me. It's opened doors for me. I've met good people. It's helped me get jobs and advance my career. It's helped me help other people. There's a whole power of yes school of thought. There's also a whole power of school of the power of no. Books written,
Mm.
psychological papers. Be more precise with your thought process. Keep the main thing the main thing. Don't disagree with any of it. I just can't do it innately. And I've succeeded so heavily with yes that I just can't subscribe to no. So again, my point on that is that, like, I can't tell everybody here that yes works for them, because they may not be able to handle that. But it's probably a blend of both. So I
Yeah.
think when looking for frameworks, go find a few, and then forge your own one as pieces of all of this, because that's probably where the sweet spot is.
Yeah, no, I I love that. The fact that you're confident to say, I believe in the power of yes, when, a lot of people believe in the power of no, and you've explained your
Yeah.
reasons why, and it suits your personality and who you are, and it works well for you, and that's fantastic. And I appreciate you saying yes to my podcast. So
This
that's
was an
fantastic.
easy one. This was an easy one, I promise.
But look, I really appreciate your time. I just want to wrap up with any other thoughts that you might have around, do you see leadership in sport going in a certain direction, or any particular advice to any of our listeners who are kind
Yeah.
of really wanting to move into leadership positions, wanting to improve as leaders within sport, and any kind of closing comments from you?
Yeah. Well, I think quickly, I think the type of athlete that is coming up generationally is different. I mean, I think that they are, and this isn't like, oh, bag on the next generation, but they're more curious. They have more willingness to say no to things. They've also, by virtue of the way the leagues have operated, have been given more power to say no, and question
Mm,
things. I mean, in the U.S., the NIL, which has allowed athletes to be paid in college and still remain amateur, which is a weird place, has changed the sort of like, who's in charge, who's in control a little bit. Obviously, in pro sports, that has changed well too. So I think there will be a need more for this type of servant leadership or empathetic type of leading, because they're going to be the ones that have been given the keys to the car. Whereas 2 generations back, they were just told what to do or what it was. What is right and what is wrong is for another podcast, another debate. But I think that having more of a empathetic style of, no matter what your ultimate style is, but an empathetic piece to your style is going to be very, very critical. I think stay curious is my biggest thing to people. Just be curious about all of this stuff. Like, I don't care if it's food, music, or leadership. Go look at all of it. Go, you know what I mean? Go do all of it. Like, it makes the world go round. It makes this job more fun. You'll find what fits you leadership style, but you've got to go looking in places you wouldn't think. And then the only other thing I would say is what I call explore the edges. And I think like people say, think outside the box, work outside the box. And the same would be true of leadership. And I think there's something to that. There is a box for a reason. Make sure you filled your box up first. Like have the tools in place, have the things that you think work, have some experience behind you, fill that box. Then explore the edges, kind of see what may be a little bit different, try something out, maybe a different type of athlete, and then you can go outside the box. So stay curious, explore the edges before you get outside the box. Obviously, again, make sure you fill your box up, but that should be kind of a given. And like I said, go look at all of it. I don't care what it is. Go meet with someone who completely doesn't agree with what I just said to you. Sit with them, take notes, listen to them. They could be more right for you personally than I am, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then, like I said, the final thing is that athletes are different. They want to know more. They want to be more engaged in what's happening. They're going to push back in ways they haven't before. So if you don't have some soft skills and you don't have some empathy behind it, you're going to struggle in leadership positions. And that's just the way of the current crop of athletes that are coming out.
Yeah, yeah. No, thanks. I really liked that. Fill your box first, then explore the edges, then look outside the box. Because from my experience, what I've noticed is that up and coming coaches are all too keen to look outside of the box
Yeah,
and
yeah,
look for the magic bullet and take the
yeah,
shortcut without doing the work of
yeah,
first fill the box, then explore around the edges, and
yeah,
then go outside the box once you've
100%.
exhausted everything else.
Yeah,
And so actually that's a really good piece of advice there, about how to be mature, basically, really be willing to do the work and fill the box first. So, but look, Dan, I really appreciate your time. Um, I know you're a busy guy, and really appreciate all the wisdom and expertise that you brought, and just some fantastic examples and something different. So really appreciate that. And just finally, if anyone wants to kind of get hold of you or look you up, what's the best way of doing that? Are you on social media, or how
yeah,
can people
yeah,
get hold of you?
yeah, sure. I mean, yes. I mean, my social media is funny. It's like travel destinations and book recommendations, so it's not the most thrilling, but it's DT underscore worldwide, with the O of worldwide being a zero, which I can send to you to after this. And I talk to people through DM on there a lot. LinkedIn, Dr. Daniel Taylor, pretty easy to find, would be another one, particularly on the more the professional sense. And yeah, I say, as I just said, say yes to pretty much everything. So I may have set myself up here, but yeah, I would love to connect. And anyone's interested to share the work that we're doing here at the HPI as well. So I'm pretty much open to whatever.
Awesome. Well, again, a big thank you from me, and yeah, we'll have to touch base again soon. But thanks a lot for your time.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, no problem. Thank you. I
All
appreciate it.
right.
Take care now.
Cheers.
Bye bye.